Hi and welcome to the Digital Accessibility Podcast, sponsored by PCR Digital, who provide people-centric recruitment. Throughout this series, I'll be interviewing professionals who work within the field of accessibility to share their expertise, journeys and general thoughts on the key issues facing the industry today. My aim is to provide an in-depth look into the world of digital accessibility and the impact it has on everyone. The goal is to bridge the skills gap in the current market and inspire other people to join the movement towards a more accessible digital world. So whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out, I hope that this platform will provide you with valuable insights and practical advice from experts and advocates in this extremely important community. So sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Today, I'm joined by Emily Rose Yates, who is the Head of Accessibility at Mima, a human-centered design agency with a core focus on physical and social accessibility. Emily is a wheelchair user who has had some truly inspiring achievements throughout her life, which I'm hoping we can discuss a bit more today. We've discussed digital accessibility at length on this podcast, and today we've got a slightly different episode. We're diving in to learn a little bit more about the thin line between physical, social, and digital accessibility. I hope that's a good general overview, Emily, but please do introduce yourself a bit more for our listeners, if that's okay.
That's great. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. It's really lovely to be here. I'm Emily, a wheelchair user. You can probably tell from my accent that I'm originally from North Yorkshire, but I now live in Glasgow, which I absolutely love. And I've been an accessibility consultant in the built environment, social and operational space for just over a decade. And now, yes, very happy to be Head of Accessibility and Inclusive Design at Mima. So I can tell you more about what we do later, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Oh, that's brilliant. And it was great meeting you very briefly, but in person recently at the Disability Expo in London. And we've also had a great chat previously. You put the world to rights, as we like to do. And I'm sure we'll do the same today. Just a heads up that we're going to stick to some preset questions. This is so our audience don't sort of see us just rambling on, and it'll just keep us on track a bit. Is that okay?
Sounds good. Sounds great.
Awesome. I'm sure we'll still find a way to ramble. It's all good. So as you know, I have done a bit of research on yourself before we first met, and I learned that you were the first wheelchair user to cross the Sinai Desert, which is absolutely phenomenal to hear about. I'm sure it was an amazing and beautiful experience, but at the same time, there must have been so much going into that in terms of planning and effort and making it happen. So would you mind telling us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely, yeah. So my first experience of accessible travel, if you like. So I was born with cerebral palsy. I've been a wheelchair user since I was 9. And my first experience of accessible travel was when I was 16. I was nominated by my school to go on a trip to Southern Africa with a charity called JOLT, Journey of a Lifetime Trust. And that was with other disabled people. And we went for a month-long adventure doing things that I never ever thought I'd be able to do. And it was just absolutely incredible. Learning about my capabilities when I think so often as a society we focus on disabled people's limitations, that was really, really cool at such a young age to be able to do. And then I came back to the UK and studied for my A-levels, and a couple of years later saw a poster for the Yorkshire Schools Exploring Society going to the Sinai Desert. So I thought, well, I'd had this most amazing trip with lots of other disabled people. This was, of course, going to be exactly the same. And from the very outset, it was a very different experience, still wonderful, still incredible, but it taught me so many lessons. First of all, it was a much smaller cohort of people, and I was the only disabled person on the trip. The Yorkshire Schools Exploring Society had been going for, I think, over 30 years at the time, and had never had a disabled person on one of their trips. So I was a bit of a guinea pig, which I don't mind. I don't mind being if I have to be. But you know, from the very beginning, it was a very different experience. The second thing that happened was the female leader that was supposed to be going on the trip withdrew her application shortly after I'd submitted mine.
Wow.
So I then had a choice of, right, okay, do I withdraw from the trip, or should my mum come with me? So, as an 18-year-old that was very bothered about her street cred, I wasn't really sure what I wanted, but my mum and I had a chat about it, and we agreed that she would go as the female leader, and it was just the most amazing bonding experience that we'd had. But yeah, in terms of planning, in terms of figuring out the logistics of being a disabled person that was a really keen traveller, but also really needing to keep up with this non-disabled group of people was quite a hard pill to swallow, if I'm completely honest. We travelled through the Sinai Desert on camel, which was absolutely incredible. And then we learnt to scuba dive in the Red Sea just off the coast of Egypt. So both of those things quite physically taxing activities. And I'm really proud to say that I did both of them, but I vividly remember going back to either the hotel or the campsite every night and just getting really upset from being so exhausted.
Wow.
So I think this idea of how we balance our focus of our capabilities and limitations, and whether that builds confidence and understanding or actually stops us from doing things, is such a powerful thing to think and talk about as disabled people. And that it definitely taught me that trip.
Amazing. Yeah. And it's just, yeah, the life experience. And then it's, I guess you can take the negatives from things, but to be able to put yourself in the mindset of what were the positives? What did I bring away from this? And I'm sure that the society that you went with have probably learnt lessons themselves, and hopefully will implement those lessons for future trips, if they, you know, they can welcome more people that are wheelchair users on trips.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if nothing else, I have learnt how to fashion a commode out of a plastic school chair very, very well.
Oh my word. That'll come in handy if you ever go to a music festival, I think, as
For
well.
sure.
So yeah, that's for everyone, that. Let's keep it inclusive. But amazing. And that's yeah, it's just incredible. And do you feel that that gave you more confidence or in your abilities as well, because you pushed yourself through that? And do you think that more people should try and push themselves to experience those types of things as well, like not focus on the limitations, I guess?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think if we're being completely honest, disability is still seen as pretty undesirable by society. You know, we're seen as a bit of a hindrance, a bit of a burden, and there's this binary, isn't there, of you're either superhuman and inspirational, or you're a benefit scrounger and you can't contribute to society. And I think what travel in general has done for me is really teach me that, hey, disabled people, we're just people that want to get by, want to have good experiences, want to have equitable experiences to our non-disabled peers. And travel is something that has made me realize how privileged I am in so many other areas of my life, how I can use the qualities that I have to help others, build empathy within myself, but help build empathy around disability as well. And yeah, it's helped me realize that I do have many capabilities and I do have flaws and limitations just like anybody else. And really, what we should be aiming for is a middle ground between the two, because we don't want pity, we don't want special treatment. And really, the only way to do that is to normalize everything as much as possible. So yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's been really powerful for me.
amazing. And it's just to keep things fair, because I think that a quote that I really love is that we or people are disabled by the environment. It's
Mm.
not that you have a disability that's stopping you from, you could do things if the environment was made accessible to you. So um yeah, it's just really powerful stuff. It really is, and it's great to hear about. So thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that.
No.
um and I guess because this is more of a business podcast, I'm going to move back now into sort of your current role at Mima, and would you mind letting me know about how your journey there began? Because I think you've mentioned that you weren't always working in an employed role.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So I started off in access consultancy, honestly, as a bit of a fluke. So finished university, studied a master's degree in disability studies, which was all around the politics and policy of disability. It was fascinating learning about that theory and that all important history. And whilst this was going on, I had volunteered at the London 2012 Paralympic Games, been involved in the wheelchair fencing, which I knew nothing about and I had to learn a lot about on the job, which was amazing. And the British consulate then got in touch with me out in Rio de Janeiro, where they were having the next games in 2016, and invited me to go out there to talk a little bit about how NGOs, but also businesses, could make themselves a little bit more accessible and inclusive ahead of the games, where all of these tourists and athletes were going to be descending on the city. And I was giving a talk somewhere, and there was a guy in the middle of the audience that at the end of my chat stood up and basically said, "Hi, I work for Metro Rio, the underground transport system in Rio de Janeiro, and we'd like to interview you for a job. We desperately need some accessibility help prior to the games because, of course, locals, tourists, athletes are going to be using our underground system to get there."
Yeah.
So I was very fortunate to get that role and spent the next 2 years on and off living and working in Rio and doing a little bit of work in the UK on the side. And then after that and after the games, came back to the UK and continued my accessibility consultancy, whether that was with disability awareness charities, whether it was with small to medium sized businesses who were maybe owned by families who really wanted to do some good stuff in terms of accessibility, but didn't necessarily have the time or the budget to go out to tender, for example, and things like
Yeah.
that. So that was really, really amazing. I absolutely loved it. And then I ended up working at Mima through a contact of mine, Phil Nutley, that works at Mima as head of innovation. We met each other in Rio, and there was an
Oh, wow.
opening, and he invited me to go and speak to them. So yeah, that was just really a stroke of luck all round. But it's been so fulfilling and enriching to work in such an important field and selfishly be better in the world for myself at the same time. So that's been great. And at Mima, really the main things that we focus on is built environment accessibility, where we support architectural or wider design teams on big master plan projects. So I'm currently working with numerous airports, museums, and actually at a couple of global events as well. We also do quite a lot of access auditing. We also facilitate and recruit lived experience user groups, which is amazing. So getting people with different impairments and access requirements to talk about certain designs. They often have quite opposing requirements and preferences. So it's really, really interesting to work out that compromise. And we've also started to deliver a fair bit of training around disability awareness as well. So that's the bulk of what we do.
Amazing. Yeah. So it touches almost all areas, really, doesn't it? It's great. And hearing you speak about what you're doing, and I know that we've mentioned before that you still do work in the digital accessibility space, and you're currently sort of gaining more as you go. But the similarities between the two, from me, an outsider looking in, are just humongous, because like you're saying, with you employing user groups for different user experience, to get their sort of any additional needs they may have, or their experience, to learn from that. And I recently had an experience. I've managed to go to the Google's Accessibility Discovery Centre in London.
Oh,
And a key thing that Chris there said was that you need to make accidents. You need to have mistakes to learn from them and then to grow. And by putting your product in front of someone and saying, break it, that's the best way that you can do it. And I
nice.
suppose we're only going to learn from those sort of mistakes and things. And it's having the impetus, having the awareness, and then ability to put things right, or at least try and help towards that. So and that's, I'm from my perspective, I'm thinking of an application, or a
Yeah,
watch, or a phone in general for Google, or a website. But you can really put that to anything when it comes to barriers for people.
absolutely.
And that's the thing. I mean, so it brings me on to the next question, which I've rephrased about 15 times. And I've got it here in front of me, and it still doesn't make sense in my head. But I just wanted to. So um, we spoke briefly about this before I started recording this episode, and I don't like to put words in people's mouths. I don't like to make people give people an identity. But I wanted to get your opinion as someone with lived experience, or someone that is a wheelchair user. How do you think we can break down that barrier between people that would consider themselves able-bodied, they don't experience any accessibility barriers in their day-to-day life? How do you think that we can convey, this is what I'm experiencing? Because it's equally as hard to get into someone's head that is experiencing things. Everyone experiences life in a different way. So it's opening people's minds to, this is how difficult it is for me to do this, and it shouldn't be, but here's a solution. Like, how do we get people in that mindset?
Yeah, it's such a good and almost impossible question.
You're
I
welcome.
think one of the most impactful things that I've ever learned is from a charity called Enhance the UK, disability awareness charity that I used to work for. And in their disability awareness training, they say that disability is the most fluid minority that exists. And the fact of the matter is that whether we like it or not, each and every one of us will experience disability at some point in our lives, hopefully through age or injury. But hey, you never know what will happen. And that makes it scary for people. It makes people want to run away from it, because who would want to face something that they know is going to happen to them? But I think the best way to think about it is to start thinking about, instead of disabled and non-disabled people, disabled and not yet disabled people. And if we can start changing that rhetoric in society, hopefully, we will get people with a little bit more intention and thought and care and interest in this field. I've found from so many different people that I work with, professionally or personally, that once they start to really understand what we do as accessibility consultants, whether physically, socially, digitally, they really get excited about it and invested in it.
Yeah.
And you may have stories of your own here, but I think what we need to do, without putting too much duty and emotional labor on access consultants or disabled people, is we need to try our best to open that world a little bit more, because it's only by being curious and asking questions and seeing what might happen tomorrow or in the future that people are going to start getting interested, excited and invested in what we do. And I think that counts regardless of what sort of accessibility field you're in, what sort of impairment or access requirement you have. I think that's what we need to do.
Definitely. And I've said multiple times before in conversations on here or in person with people, that it is, I think, entirely mindset driven. You need to have that mindset, maybe the empathy. And I've oftentimes thought, as a recruitment consultant in the space, I'm trying to think, who are the types of people that would fit within this field? And a lot of people will say, well, empaths, people with empathy, and a lot of people that have experienced some form of disability or impairment tend to have more empathy for others because they've got their own experience of it. And some people would say male versus female divide, but I've not seen any evidence of stark difference at all in my world anyway. But there's an amazing lady called Helen Wilson, and she is doing an awful lot to push for education on accessibility and disability at
Mhm.
Key Stage 2 level in schools,
Oh,
primary education.
wow.
And I think I mean, it's such a wonderful idea to think, well, as soon as you open up children's minds to this, they will have had an experience, they would have learned a bit more. I mean, it's not in every classroom you have someone with a, an impairment or a disability, is there?
Mhm.
So to just have that as part of your syllabus, it's going to ingrain that. So as they go to higher education, college, university, entering the world of work, they will have that mindset of, but if it doesn't work for me, it's not going to work for other people. But
Mhm.
also thinking about, well, what could someone experience that, how else can I design this? So
Yeah.
yeah, what a great idea.
That's really cool, and I think the more that education happens, the less that fear factor surrounding disability is embedded. I I go around the supermarket and a little child comes up to me and says, "Oh, you're in a pram too," for example. They might say something like that. And the parents shoo them away and go, "Don't be rude. Like that's an awful thing
Mm,
to say. Hush, hush." And
mm,
it's not rude or awful at all. They're finding common ground with something that they know and they're wanting to talk to me about it. And that's beautiful and that's lovely. And if
innocent
they
as well.
have, yeah,
Yeah.
and if they have questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. And I think that fear that we get as we get older is so apparent when it comes to disability. So apparent. And as much as we can minimize and reverse that, the better.
Yeah, 100%. And to touch on something else you've said, which I know that you've mentioned, it was through, is it Enhanced UK? That is the most fluid sort of thing that's going to, everyone will experience it. That
Mm.
also brings me on to the Microsoft Design Toolkit, which
Yeah.
mentions temporary, permanent, situational
Yeah.
barriers.
Yeah.
So, someone with a hearing impairment or who is deaf or hard of hearing, they have a permanent sort of barrier that they experience. Although if you get a hearing infection or you get tinnitus or something like that, you're also a bit sensitive to sound.
Yeah.
You might need to use captions on your phone because you can't bear having the noise on, or you might be a bartender and you can't currently hear what someone's ordering, so it's better
Yeah.
that they write it down. So there's it is for everyone, and I
It,
think that that's the divide that doesn't need to exist. It's not able-bodied and disabled. It is genuinely, if you create something with accessibility in mind, it's good for everyone.
you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I so often hear new parents in particular saying, "Oh, I've just had to go around London with my newborn baby in a pram, and oh, I get it now. I
Yeah.
really understand it, and I get it now." With that
Mm.
temporary or situational quote unquote impairment of having a child in a buggy and having to navigate an environment that wasn't built for that, suddenly, yeah, okay, right, I understand it now, and I'm an advocate and I'm an ally. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's normally how it goes.
I think it's just that awareness, isn't it? Just trying to, and hopefully we'll do that with this. But and
Yeah.
I just thinking that, like, yeah, well, I won't park up on a curb because people need to get by. Like
Yeah.
something as
Yeah.
simple as
Yeah.
that, and
Yeah.
you might make someone's day by creating space.
Totally.
Amazing. Okay, cool. And so yeah, sorry to spin back again. So your work's primarily within the sort of physical and social accessibility space, but there is quite an invisible or thin line between the two with digital accessibility. So we've already discussed that. Being that this is a podcast around digital,
Mm.
could you give us an insight? So we've heard a lot of people's backgrounds, what they're currently doing day to day on digital accessibility space. But I know you've mentioned you've done some work with global events or with museums. Is there anything that you can sort of let us know what was a typical day? What were you sort of needing to do at
Yeah.
Mima?
Absolutely. And I think when it comes to digital accessibility, hands up immediately, I am not a digital access expert. I am very much learning. This is almost like the third pillar that I'm learning a little bit as I go. But the thing that's really important to us at Mima, and the thing that really, I guess, anchors my working day, whether I'm thinking about physical, social, or digital access, is the end to end journey and the end to end experience for both customer and colleague. So I'll give you a digital access example. Whilst I could never go into the back end of a website and make sure that it's accessible in terms of WCAG 2.1 or anything like that, level AA. What I do a lot when thinking about that end-to-end journey and that end-to-end experience is think about, right, okay, I've got somebody here who I'm designing for. They're autistic and they might specifically need a quiet space within this museum that I'm working with. So I might want to think about how we can design that in physically. I might also want to look at how the acoustics are working within this place to make sure that, you know, quiet areas are possible just within the communal areas wherever possible. Lighting might also be a really big issue. Is there independence over dimming that, brightening it, etc.? What about the opening hours of the museum and whether or not they can provide some quieter hours or some specific tours? What about the colour palette in the space? Can it be calming and neutral whilst also being contrasting enough for a blind or partially sighted person to be able to navigate the same space? So they're all quite physical and social operational thoughts. But where digital access comes in for me is I think, right, okay, so this museum does offer specific neurodiversity friendly opening hours, for example. Right, that's great. But how are people going to know about that? There needs to be some kind of accessibility guide or some kind of advertising information available online to allow somebody to familiarize and pre-tool themselves with the space. Okay, right. They might not still have the confidence to actually go to the museum and experience it within these hours. What else could we do? Maybe we could provide a 360-degree video tour of the space that would allow that person from their comfort of their own home to build that familiarity and confidence around visiting. If somebody's presenting in that video, we need to make sure that it's captioned for somebody who's deaf or has hearing loss. We might also want to provide some kind of transcript or audio description as well. So you can see how, from a main focus in physical and operational accessibility, quite often my work does merge into the digital access space, but very much from a front end perspective, looking at that end to end experience. What will that visitor or colleague need to have in the digital space to make them utilize the physical space? That's how I would say I work it.
Wow. Oh, it's just, and it's, as soon as everything just seems so familiar, and I'm sure that anyone that listens to this episode will go, oh yeah, that's what I do, but just with the HTML and CSS or YR.
Although it just goes straight over my head, does that bit. So I do need somebody with that wonderful technical expertise to teach me.
I'm sure that there's plenty of people out there, and I'm sure there's plenty that would love to work with you as well. But brilliant. And then, so and obviously I've got a point because I always seem to ramble. I spoke to another lady who was working for the Ministry of Justice, and they were working on visual, VR experiences for people that need to attend court. To familiarize themselves with the surroundings. So when they arrive at court, there's obviously tons and tons of pressure and stress, be it that you're being convicted, or if you are a victim, or you're in the jury, you may have anxiety going into those sorts of situations. So to at least familiarize yourself ahead of time, at least you've got that under the belt, and then the other pressures of being in a courtroom, the whole authority figure and stuff like that. It freaks me out, so I can understand. So at least you can, and what a great thing to think.
That's amazing
to put in place. Just to, if it's one less barrier, then it's doing the right thing, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, that's amazing. And from quite a socioeconomic class perspective, that's really, really interesting as well, because the legal justice system in general is obviously known for being pretty elitist and I guess, almost taking advantage of that technical knowledge that a lot of people don't have. I wouldn't have a clue of what to do if suddenly I was asked to go to court. I wouldn't know what processes happen. And I think only a very select few do. So from a kind of wider human nature, human characteristics perspective, that's really fascinating as well. It benefits so much more than accessibility elements.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. And I think I'm now thinking, well, if you were if you were taken to court and because of the additional anxiety, because of the additional nerves, you don't represent yourself in the way you normally would have if you were being interviewed elsewhere, rather than having this big audience around you and the jury and the judge and all, it makes it a fairer trial, and that
Yeah,
should be something that is considered globally, isn't it?
that's
So
so cool. So
fascinating.
cool. Yeah.
And just daily, you wouldn't think about it until you're in that situation. You wouldn't, would you? So it's yeah, just another fascinating topic.
Mm.
So cool. I mean, I'm about to probably bore you and everyone else with a bunch of acronyms and numbers and letters, and it's going to do me wonders when I'm writing the captions and the transcript later. Um, but within digital accessibility, there are various guidelines or regulations and standards to refer back to, or that you may have to try and implement, or you can use as collateral when people are asking you, but why? Why do we need to do this? Such as WCAG, or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, just because I hate myself, ISO 30,071 and 1, and BS 8878, or the extremely accessible EN 301549 in Europe. There's also Section 508, or the ADA, in the US. So this is just going to be really fun later. But I'd like to know a bit more about the sort of standards and regulations in place for the physical or social side of accessibility. I think that Craig Abbott in the last episode mentioned around the cognitive side of accessibility. There's more stuff being written by the
Yes.
W3C. But on the physical side, is it like the Disability Act, or are there more regulations that we should be aware of?
So the legal side of things very much stems from the Equality Act 2010, that really imposes a public sector equality duty on businesses to foster good relations, to eliminate any kind of discrimination, and advance equal opportunity. But you cannot say that you comply with the Equality Act because it's a rights-based act. It's not a standard. So when people say that, that's incorrect.
Mm.
In terms of standards and legalities, you would then look to building regulations, approved document M, and that very much provides what I think most accessibility consultants would now consider quite a basic baseline in terms of built environment accessibility. But it very much still provides that collateral why, as you mentioned earlier, which is still important, sadly. You know, still we're often the no people in the room that we have to prove our reasoning. In terms of good and better practice, you'd be then looking at BS 8300 parts 1 and 2, looking at the external and the internal environments. Again, very much built environment, but provides very much a more aspirational best practice view on built environment accessibility than approved document M does. It's more updated and it's just that kind of level up. But very, very interestingly, and I don't know if the same is true with digital access, but very much depending on the sector that you're working in is where that best practice lies. So if I'm working with a transport client, or I'm looking to go to planning committee within something in the urban realm, I'd look at the Department for Transport's inclusive mobility document, for example, which was released last year and provides some really, really good level of built environment stuff, specifically around the areas of mobility, parking, urban realm. There's an amazing new PAS that's just come out, a PAS 6463, which is all around neurodiversity and design for the mind. So you might again want to go into an airport, for example, and you've got all your built environment ideals and principles there, but you might just want to make some tweaks to things like the color palette, the lighting, the acoustics, to make sure it's more accessible for neurodivergent individuals. There's also some really good standards coming out and work still being done around electric vehicle charging, because as I'm sure you know, a lot of chargers came out that were totally inaccessible. So there's quite a lot of retrofitting work being done at the moment. So yeah, it really does depend on the sector that you're working in. And quite a lot of organisations are now bringing out their own built environment processes and policies, which is really cool too. Quite often the hardest thing is knowing which one to choose and which one almost trumps the other.
Yeah. Oh wow. Oh my God. And I guess you're only going to know about those if you know about them or if you're
Yeah.
looking for them, I suppose. So I'm thinking about a friend of mine. He's an interior architect or an interior designer, and I'm wondering if he would have known about, if he has to consider these things, especially like you say, the color palette and things. I guess
Yeah.
if you're being paid to design for a specific person and they're paying you up front, but if it's designing, government buildings or public spaces, then there should be that in place. And I'm
Yeah.
assuming that people that work in that area will be working towards those standards. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. So, in terms of what they would have to kind of look at and make sure they're aligned with, it would be your approved document. It would be your fire regulations, for example. And I think you're absolutely right. It's often then a bit of a battle between the baseline and the aspirational, or the shall and the should, if you like.
Mm.
Yes, you must do this, and we're gonna tick these boxes, for a lack of a better term. But how are we going to encourage that client, that design team, whatever it might be, to go up a few stages, to look at the PAS, on designing for the mind, and really start thinking about the nuances of this stuff, because that's not in your building regs. So yeah, quite a lot of my job, a lot of the time, is pushing that aspiration wherever I can, and I'm sure it's the same in digital access as well.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, a lot of what I'm hearing about digital accessibility is that they are guidelines. The things that they depend upon are still known as guidelines. So when you're still trying at that stage of trying to get the buy-in from the decision makers in a business to say, yes, okay, we'll spend money on making this accessible for the additional 15% of the population, or to ensure that there are people willing to spend the purple pound,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
tap into that market. If that's what tickles your fancy and it's purely money driven, then great, as long as it's being built accessible for everyone.
Mm.
But and then the pushback is always, but do we have to? Not always, sorry, I shouldn't say always, but a lot of the time it's, how important is it? We need to get this released. We've got a deadline. We've already spent X amount. We need to get the app out there so people are using it. We need some return on investment. Can we do it later? And it's like, yeah, you can, but it'll be 60 times more expensive to put it
Mhm.
right.
Mhm.
So
And
I
you'll
don't
have
know.
pissed a lot of people off in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. And no one will return. It's the reputational risk as well. So there's a lot of argument for, definitely, but then I just feel that there are certain times where people will just say, but I'm not going to get sued, and I'm doing okay as it is, so why? And it's, again, building that empathy, and hopefully with the new generation of kids that are learning from Helen Wilson stuff,
Yeah, absolutely.
it'll be ingrained in everyone. Amazing. All good. And so, obviously, I'm a recruitment consultant. As you know, I may have tried to poach you in the past or tried to work with you and Mima, but we'll leave that there. But I wanted to know what your experience has been of job hunting. Do you feel, is there a certain place you would go to look for work? I know that you've mentioned that you've had people approach you in this respect, but interview processes, do you feel the obligation to make it apparent on your CV or profile that you
Mm.
are a wheelchair user, or should it entirely be the responsibility of the hirer to say, we will make reasonable adjustments, we just need to know what you need? What's your experience been in that sort of space?
It's really, really interesting, and it's a great question. And the only thing that's going through my mind is I would do exactly the same thing as I used to do on my Tinder profile. Dating and job applications,
What,
similar things.
swiping right?
And really, that is to say that I feel very fortunate in a strange way that I have such a visible impairment, because it makes it very easy to say, right, okay, I'm going to need accessible parking, please, step-free access, and an accessible toilet, and then I'm grand. And I think the difficulty with disclosure still comes when people have non-visible impairments. There is a real lack of understanding, of empathy, of acceptance around that. These individuals are constantly having to justify what their requirements are and why, and there is very little done around providing appropriate, reasonable adjustments, whether that's at the interview process or in terms of progress and retainment and um, what's the word? Promotion. I
Promotion,
don't
yeah.
know why I didn't get that. I think that's often the real difficulty. And I feel very fortunate that I've not had to have that experience, because I've got many friends that have, and it's not pleasant constantly feeling like you've got to justify things and ask for things. So I do absolutely think that in many ways the onus is on the employer to state that, they actively encourage applications from lots of different people with different protected characteristics. But it's about making sure that that process in itself is accessible, it's stress free. Whether you are holding an interview in person or online, have you made sure that that environment, that platform is accessible and caters to the requirements of your interviewee?
Yeah.
And quite a lot of the time, it sounds so common sense and so simple, but that's because it is. It's about asking rather than assuming. It's about having the confidence to email someone and go, right, okay, is there anything that you need from me? And I think if we normalized that, regardless of who the person is, what they've put on their profile, be it Tinder or a job application, if we normalized that and we asked everybody if they had any kind of accessibility requirements, if there's any adjustments that we can make, actually this strange thing about how do we encourage disclosure would pretty much disappear,
Yeah.
because you are giving people the platform to share with you what they require, and you're encouraging it in a positive way that makes them feel comfortable, like there won't be any negative repercussions if they do so.
Yeah, make it commonplace and standard practice. And I think it is.
Yeah.
It's just you're not offending anyone by asking, but I think that there is that fear that we mentioned earlier that even just by asking, you may offend, and that's the last thing most people want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, recruitment is such a humongous business, and there's a lot of people that do it a certain way, and sometimes what I would call the wrong way. And it is just the oh, you've got keywords on your CV, I'll send the CV out, you should be great, and then the rest is up to you. And that's just not how it should be done, but
Yeah.
unfortunately it happens quite a lot of the time. And I was assuming then, because I know when we first met, it was on a video call, and it was only when you mentioned, oh, I'm a wheelchair user, that I went, are you? So if I were hiring you and interviewing you and hadn't thought of asking you, but every interview was video call, and then at the end of the process, I've offered you the job. I'm like, oh, cool. So we're based on the 23rd floor, and there's no lift access.
Yeah.
We meet 3 times a week in London. You'd go, ah, I wish you would have mentioned that at the beginning,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
again is the onus on the employer. But then they should have just asked. They should have asked at the beginning. So yeah, no, brilliant. Okay. I'll definitely bear that in mind. And we do, so we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement. We make sure we put that at the bottom of every single job spec that we write
Nice.
and advertise. So obviously we want to advertise to everyone. Everyone is absolutely welcome to apply. And we do have sort of set questions that we have to ask. And that the awkwardness also includes, do you have any unspent criminal convictions? It's still something we need to ask, but it's still, someone might think, why are you making that assumption? But if it's common practice and every recruitment consultant asks that question, there's no need to get offended.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those things. Hopefully we'll change the world after this one episode. But cool. So I mean, it's been amazing. So final thoughts at the minute. So if there's anything that you want to share, anything of importance to you, anything you'll be doing coming up, or any events that you might be going to, then feel free to let everyone know.
Oh, that's really interesting. I have a couple of really, really cool engagements coming up, specifically looking at the accessibility of air travel, a few events that I've been invited to, and also a few boards that I'm on. So that's going to be quite exciting, looking at that from a passenger perspective, also with my consultancy head on as well. So I'm quite excited to see where that goes. Aside from that, I'm just trucking on, in all honesty. We're very busy, very, very thrilled and very grateful to be so. So if anybody is interested in chatting to me, either from a client perspective or from somebody who's interested in access consultancy and would love to learn more, I would absolutely be over the moon to chat with you.
Oh, amazing. And I'm sure that there'll be people chomping at the bit to speak to you because you're such a nice person to chat with. So, and
Oh,
I've always loved chatting with you, and I'm glad that we've managed to do this today as well. So thank you. But
oh.
and as part of the outro for each episode, I like to share a quote that might help inspire. Hopefully, we've got plenty of quotes that you've made today that'll inspire people, but just so that it's not all doom and gloom. And Marcus Osterberg is the author of Web Strategy for Everyone,
Mhm.
and he has written in there, when speaking of disabilities, the blind and their needs are most often used as an example, and it's deceivingly simplistic, since accessibility is something most of the population can benefit from, which I
Mm,
think leans back to the Microsoft design principles of
absolutely.
situational. So, but yeah, all good.
That's really
Um,
nice.
awesome. Thank you so much again. Really love chatting with you. I'm sure everyone else is going to love listening to this as well.
Thank you.
Um, thanks for the incredible work that you're doing at Mima and beyond. And I'm sure we'll catch up and chat again very soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and inviting me on. It's been a real pleasure.
No problem at all. And yeah, we'll keep in touch. Take care.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks once more to Emily for all her insight and sharing her experiences with me today. Just a reminder that PCR Digital are sponsoring Accessibility Scotland, which takes place on Friday the 8th of September 2023, and I'll be there, so I'd love to meet as many of you as possible. Hope you enjoyed the episode today, and I'll catch you on the next one.